welcoming the human that sits in front of us to show up with us and be authentic. So yes, it is a process, and I'm here for it because like that is what change is. It doesn't just happen overnight. It happens through time. So
I am Alejandro.
I'm Mordecai.
And I'm Chrissy.
And where are you there? So, hello. We are back. I'm excited to see y'all. How are we all feeling?
I'm feeling great today.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, vibes are high in here. I love it. So, we are back, episode 2. We are going to be given a little bit of context of, before we talked about how we got here individually, so now we're going to open up the door a little bit and say how we got here as just as a movement, really. The history of the youth movement, if we will. I love the youth movement. It's confusing to me because history is one of those things that I did very terrible at.
Same.
So learning to kind of tag it with something that I know happened around that time made it a lot easier for me. So I did that today for a lot of my notes. I hope that helps a lot of the listeners today. How are y'all feeling about it?
It's good. It's good. Yeah, I also was not like a history buff by any means, but I do think that it's important to understand how we got here as a collective in the peer support world. So I'm excited to dive into it.
Very nice.
Same seas. I feel like anytime you take time to honor, right, there's a thing called continuity over time. So you respect the journey, basically, right, that it got us to where we are today. So I'm really excited that that's what we're talking about.
And that is what we're going to do today, starting right now. So I am terrible at history. I almost said math, which is also a sad truth. But I am not good at history. So I did like a deep dive on every part of the youth movement, and it's broken up into 4 parts. So it's the community support movement, the consumer survivor movement, the family movement, and the youth movement. That's strictly in America, and that started in the 1960s.
Right.
I did find, cool little a little fun fact, that the very first mention of peer support happened in the 18th century in France. And it was done by a guy named Jean-Baptiste Poussin. I'm not French, so I probably butchered that. But they were a physician that worked at a hospital, and they realized that the people who stayed at the hospital or had work done at the hospital, they were the best people to work there because they truly understood what it was like to be in the hospital. At the time, in the 18th century, it was kind of just like one and done, turn and burn, you're in, you're out. I'm going to be tired. I have, like, what was invented back then? I think candlelight was still popping.
Wow,
so like there was only usually sometimes one person working or just for a specific thing. Kind of the start of working in bigger facilities in hospitals started becoming more and more popular the bigger the populations were. And then here is where that started to get implemented, is that the people that were staying at our hospital, please come back and help the other people realize that it's not that bad of a place. A lot of people have bad experiences here. We want to show that it might not always be possible with the opportunity for peer support. So it's people with that lived experience helping other people going through that similar experience. And so that's the first mention we have here, but it kind of started off in America in about 1960 with the community support movement. And it's going to go to Mordecai. He's going to tell you a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So it was really this like evolution over time up until like the 1950s, 1960s, when you're having all of these folks in psychiatric hospitals who are experiencing a lot of mistreatment, right? And there was a lot happening in the 1960s, a lot that was coming forward to push for better human rights as a whole. And there's a lot of shifts in the socio-political realms moving towards a more community-based care or community-based services, which makes a lot of sense for where we were at that time.
100. You know, what's interesting hearing you talk about that is what all was going down in that time frame, right? So if we're thinking about like there was actual literal war that was going on, and folks were coming back and
Around the world.
It was a world war.
No.
But like it's insane because it's like people were coming back and having like experiences. You know, I'm even thinking about families who lost folks. It could be anything, right? And to be stigmatized for what you're going through. I just can't even imagine. Like, well, I can because we even have stigma today. And so that's how we can see stigma can stick. And it's because of the historical context that we're talking about, which kind of brings us into that 70s movement, right? Getting into the consumer / survivor. I like it to be titled survivor movement more than I like consumer. And I think that's why it needed to be a movement, because mental health, as I think about it, or as I dream about how I'd like our mental health treatment to be, I don't want to be labeled as a consumer. You know, I want to be labeled as I actually want to be labeled as somebody who's thriving, even if I'm experiencing mental health. And so like in the 70s, you see folks who are moving to say, hey, we have been kind of victimized in so many ways by the systems that have been around us. And what they ended up doing is really advocating and becoming groups and making that movement, right? Which kind of pushed them, these folks who are experiencing, they were families, right, Alejandro? So yeah, tell us about that family movement.
Family movement is wild. Because this is when the people kind of started getting a mistrust for the mental health institutions. There was just a lot of wrongdoings, like what you were talking about before with the World War II, like people who came back with post-traumatic stress,
right?
No one knew what to do. So there was like institution. They started institutionalizing anyone who didn't fit the mold of what was the norm. Yeah. So they were all institutionalized. And with that abuse of power that went even through the 70s, families were just like, my kids can't do that. That sucks. And then there was even like policies that happened with that. There was the Family Protection Act that was done. And I wrote this down because it blew my mind, which further pinpointed like the mistrust. And it was made by Senator Paul Laxalt, who was the co-chairman of Ronald Reagan's whole shindig. So Reagan.
Interesting.
And what they said, it was going to be like, this act was going to be the dawn of the new family age. And what it entailed was denying education money to states that no longer allow prayer in school buildings, declared spankings to be constitutional and not really abusive. Also, federal attempts to change child abuse laws were out the window, did not exist. It's throw it out. We're not looking at it. And it would also refuse legal aid services for abortions, school desegregations, divorce, or homosexual rights.
Wow.
On top of all that, there was the icing on the cake is that hospitals and medical professionals were required to tell parents when their children were getting contraceptives. So nothing was secret. Everything was ousted. And there was no more trust with the system. So families were moving further away from the system and then just asking for help from other families. And that's, in a sense, what peer support, it's lived experience. Like, I have this going on with my kid. What do you got going on with yours? So people were starting to build that community and that movement and a push forward for that, which led us into what is now the youth movement.
Yeah. Which is wild to think about in so many ways, because I don't know if you will agree with me, both of you, but doesn't it kind of feel like even currently that, at least for American culture, that we're having like a distrust in the system currently, and we're seeing like peer support is actually being heavily advocated for, because it's like, we need that. We're recognizing as a community that we need peer support because of that distrust in the system, because we've witnessed and gone through the harm that can kind of come through it. So thinking about the youth movement, I guess it's just really rapidly still alive. It's still happening. So we're thinking about like the 90s. So for the listeners out there, pre-podcast, Alejandro kind of blew my mind because we're thinking about like the internet, right? And how the internet kind of was like, I guess you could say, released to public in around the 90s. And that made it so that youth and young adults around the world could communicate to each other and share and express. You know, I think about when I was little, you know, I had blogs and I used to share almost just like openly about all the things. And I loved when someone would relate in a comment. And I guess I still do. TikTok, all those things. I love when I can see, am I the only one who does this? Or am I the only one experiencing isolation, et cetera? And it's like we relate. And I think that movement is still alive. May have kicked off in the 90s, but I think we're still living it. I think this podcast is even a testimony to it.
Yeah, it's definitely a product of the movement for sure.
Yeah, because we're going to go on the internet. Here we are. So where do we want to go from here? Because we're really covering the historical context, and we're even thinking about that present. What would be y'all's vision? Like, what would you want to see peer support look like?
I mean, I have, I think I talked about this in the last podcast. I feel like I have a lot of big dreams, a lot of big like visions for things.
We want you to.
But, you know, I feel like peer support has a place, honestly, throughout the entirety of an individual's life, like not even just as like a young person, but I work with a lot of folks who are transitioning from like our services out to, you know, they're beyond 25. And so they're, you know, transferring into a whole other world, and there's no resources, no peer supports for them. And they've just gotten like all this help and support with someone who's very relatable. And now they're like, well, I guess it's just a therapist and that's like it.
Right.
When like a therapist doesn't really meet the need that a peer support does in the same way. So I would love to see it where we have peer supports that can be with a person when they're at the hospital or at the doctor's office, someone who can be there through their schooling, someone who can be there if they need help with certain like daily life tasks, things like that, you know, maybe they have a lot of anxiety around or need extra help with. Just to feel like they're not alone and that they have that extra support to see them in that moment. And then even beyond that through other like huge life transitions, because I even hear that with like mothers, how that's a huge like death of past self into the new role that they're taking on and the new self that they have to be.
Right.
So like how many other like positions in a person's life could there be benefit from having someone who's been there before and could be with them along that ride, you know?
Absolutely.
I like that. I also have big dreams, and it is tough. Similar to you, I want resources to be accessible and readily available for everyone. And it's super easy to say that when you live in a big city. If you live in a town of like less than 1,000, it's not really readily available. So it's not necessarily saying I want to push everything that we believe into those societies, but or just like those communities, I want it to make it known. And that's it. That's all I want. I just want to be like, hey, here's this cool thing that's happening. I'm not going to force you to do it. Never would I force anyone to do anything. I'm just like, here's the door. If you want to walk through it, go for it. Yeah. So that's the mentality that I have for everyone that I wish to work with or like do work with, is that I want you to know and be educated about the things that are available for you. Yes. And if you want the help to find those, I will be the one to do that for you. Or if you want to find them on yourself, here's where a good place to start is. That's the kind of thing that I want for the youth now.
I like that a lot. And I guess all three of us are big dreamers, because I'm a big dreamer too. Like, I think it'd be, you know, where do we want to see it go? I would love to see kind of like what Mordecai was sharing is like, there's so many things that when you go through it in life, if someone else has experienced it prior, so that literal peer support and saying, I can really recognize how you're feeling or what this might feel like, or I might recognize how to empower you through this process. And I think about the random things like buying a house, right? How daunting is buying a house? And it's like having somebody who literally isn't interested in, making money off of you. They're interested in like, I want you to feel like you know what to say when you're going through this, And so I would love to see that peer support is in schools, starting maybe middle school, high school, college. I'd love to see that people can get that if they choose. Like what you're saying, it's not forced on you, but it's an option. Like you have the ability to reach out to somebody who's got your interest at heart, who would love to see you be successful and feel empowered to do what you got to do. When you do talk about like services and stuff and like having these resources, that's a huge dream too. In my opinion, I think the reason why society has such a distrust is because it is quite hard to get what you need, right? Even for my own lived experience currently, it's extremely difficult for me to get a therapist, especially a therapist that I feel culturally aligns with me. And so it does create this distance between me and I guess like a belief that my society or like my community is going to be there. So I guess dreaming and thinking about where would I like it to go, I would love to see how both of you have said things be readily available.
Something that you're sharing on like the distrust aspect. I mean, that's something that like has really fueled this whole like industry, right? Because, in the past it was like, all right, they don't know how to take care of us. They don't know how to like treat us with kindness and respect and honor our individuality and even allow us to leave the hospital if we feel like we're ready to go.
Oh, so true. Yeah.
And so like, that's kind of where this really started. And then we're moving into, those people who left those institutions, they became educated and they were able to be like, all right, we know that there's a better way. How can we make this happen to try to like pave the way for other people? But like, it is obviously still a process because even with like accessing mental health care, I have found like, okay, am I allowed to say this or is this going to like get me locked up, or like what? So like but I think that's also the beautiful thing about peer support is that we're not here to like police you and try to like shame you into, I don't know, changing or whatever. Right. So I think there's a lot of beauty that just can be had with understanding that distrust is a part of this like evolution of why we're actively trying to dismantle that like structure in our relationships with the people that we're supporting.
100. Yeah.
I do have a question for y'all that I thought of. So all of these movements started with the distrust of the system.
Right.
Yeah. And it sounds like there's still a lot of distrust in the system. And that's just because there's a lot of duality happening in the country.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Or just the world as a whole, right? There's two sides to everything. So what, in your guys' eyes, would make that trust kind of come back? How could you regain that trust? Okay,
I want to take this right off rip. Okay, seriously, in my opinion, I think what would put trust back is if, think about funding. A lot of things always boil down to finances, and it's unfortunate, but it's reality. I would love to see our leaders, whether it's in like, state leadership or whatever, I would like to see them funnel funding back into what genuinely matters, right? So funnel back to the teachers, funnel back to the community programs, funnel back to things like peer support, right? Birth doulas, community health workers, whatever it might be, but funnel that money back. Instead, currently the way it is it's kind of like a bidding process. It shouldn't be like that. It should be, what's going to heal the community? Let's put our money there. Whereas, and again, I don't want to make this podcast where it's like me personally as an individual is shaming our current process, but the reality is our current process, a lot of finance goes towards weaponry and military. I think that is an important thing, but I feel like we've taken the cake. Like we have everything we need.
We got the biggest one in the world.
Let's return it back. We did what we wanted to do in that arena. So let's like check that box off and like, let's move back to, let's heal our land. And let's put the finances back into the places that are going to do that. I'm very passionate about that.
Beautiful. That really made me think of that trust equation, right? So like transparency plus consistency over time equals trust. So if they're able to be consistent in their efforts and they're transparent in where that money is going or how they're showing up over time, that trust could be built.
Yes.
I like that. Mine is tough. Mine is to remove all stigma. Like labels,
I love that.
labels are tough.
Yeah.
So there are people who we want to help, and there's, for some reason, people we don't want to help. So people who are being released from jails or prison, out, right?
Right.
They deserve just as many rights as we do. They need help, and we, as a nation, in a sense, turned our back on them.
Right.
The homeless community, same thing. We as a nation have turned our back on the homeless community. They need all the help that they can get. And we're just like, but what about me? It should be like, what about us kind of thing.
Yes.
And that's the stigma that I want to change to, is instead of being like, what about me? It's how can I help us? And that's what we all do as work in a nutshell, is how can I support you? How can we support our community? And that is the big ask that I have. And once I see that shift, I'll start trusting things again.
Love it. Okay, so question back then, because, thinking about our listeners, like, I'm imagining that folks will kind of have this playing when they're at work. Maybe they're doing their case notes or something like that. How do we tie this back to kind of like us? And so, like, when you say that, and all of us have kind of shared, what do we need to get the trust back? How do we be a part of that? Or are we already? Because we are the peers. Are we a part of that, building that trust back?
I believe we are. And I think that comes with a lot of the conversations about challenging our biases, both conscious and unconscious.
Yes.
And then also just how we do the work that we do.
Yes.
We are a big, especially in peer support, we lead by example. So we're not here to do this for us. I'm here because I want the future generation to do what's even better for the next generation. It's leave it better than how you found it.
Yeah.
And if we keep doing that, then it's going to be great. It's going to be a long road, that is for damn sure. But it is going to be, the benefits are going to be significantly better than they are now.
Agreed.
And yeah, I feel like, yes, we are a part of that movement of rebuilding that trust. As long as we too are like willing to, right, like remove those biases, we have to, being in this work, if you're not learning every day, what are you doing?
It's true, facts, yeah.
But like, I know for myself, like this role has really helped me shift so much of that stigma, so much of those like internal thoughts and things that I've been taught by society, by my family, to readjust, to be like, okay, actually, what is really happening here? Like, what is the truth beyond this? Because, right, a lot of things in our society, we see people as numbers, as money, as these objects, less than like actual human beings. And so remembering that we're all human and knowing that we all come to this with a very individualized lens, and that, we all are here because we have lived experience, like that is, I think, part of rebuilding that trust and repair, because we're getting rid of the power dynamic. We're welcoming the human that sits in front of us to show up with us and be authentic. So yes, it is a process, and I'm here for it because like that is what change is. It doesn't just happen overnight. It happens through time. So.
We've been doing this since the 60s, and it's still the process of getting there.
And even then, I want to challenge that too. And then, I'll get to wrapping things up, but
sure.
All right. When we're with our friends, are we not also a peer support to some degree? Right. And for as long as humans have existed, we've probably all had friends. So I'm sure peer support has existed as long as humanity has been. But as far as recorded history and what we know,
I actually stopped going to a therapist because he's just like, yeah, I'm just like a friend. And I was like, oh, I got plenty of those. I'm just going to go talk to those guys.
Oh, no.
And then he's like, no, wait, no. And I was like, I'm finding somebody else.
That's great. So, all right, listeners. So we talked about, kind of how things started on a global level. We talked about how things transformed in the community support level into the survivor movement into the family movement and then the youth movement, which we are still in
Right.
and grateful that we are continually moving forward. And, we talked a little bit about where we want to go from here, our big dreams, our visions, and just want to say thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us and giving us the opportunity to share a little bit about what peer support is and the background of it.
Yeah. And just listening to Mordecai right there, it makes me think maybe you all might want to share what your dreams are. So if you do, guess what? We have just launched a Discord channel because we here at Youth Era and this team, we want to keep peers connected. So if you want to share that and you find it, we're going to have a channel in the Discord. To find us on Discord, all you have to do is search for YE Connect. You can also find us on Instagram at The Youth Era. You can follow our TikTok at Youth Era. So just closing us out, shouting us out. Find us. We've got a community for you.
Love it. As a goodbye, what's the name of the next movement?
I was actually just thinking, you're so funny. We were on the same wavelength. Name of the next movement. I feel like it has to be Mimi. Like, honestly, it's got to be something that's...
Dude, it's the power movement. That's a fact.
Ooh, I like the power movement. Well, I guess our listeners could tell us their guess on that too.
Yeah. Give us some good suggestions.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you next episode.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.